Most people assume that going to sleep is the safest part of their entire day. You close your eyes, your body settles into the mattress, your breathing slows, and somehow the world takes care of itself until morning arrives. That belief is deeply comforting. It is also, for millions of adults over the age of 50, dangerously incomplete. Think about what you did last night before bed. You probably ate dinner, maybe watched some television, perhaps took a medication or two if you are on any, and then lay down and closed your eyes without a second thought. That routine felt responsible. It felt normal. It felt safe. But what if the specific combination of things you did in those final hours before sleep, the things that feel most ordinary, were quietly putting your cardiovascular system under a level of strain that it was never designed to handle night after night? What if the advice you have been given your entire adult life has left out something critically important about what actually happens inside your heart and your brain while you are unconscious and completely unable to help yourself? Nobody warns you about this in the way it deserves to be discussed. Your doctor talks about diet during the daytime, about getting more exercise, about managing stress in your waking hours. Health magazines publish endless articles about sleep duration and sleep quality. But almost nobody sits across from you and says, the specific things you are doing in the 2 or 3 hours before you fall asleep could be building, silently and invisibly, toward a cardiovascular crisis that strikes in the middle of the night while every person in your house is asleep and unaware. This is the conversation that has not been happening loudly enough, and tonight it needs to happen clearly. Here is what makes this situation so deeply troubling. This is not new information that science is just beginning to understand. Researchers have known for years, for decades in many cases, that the nighttime hours represent a uniquely dangerous window for cardiovascular events in adults over the age of 50. The American Heart Association has published data on this. Major universities across the United States and Europe have conducted large, long-running studies tracking tens of thousands of patients over years and decades. The evidence has been consistent, clear, and well documented across multiple research populations on multiple continents. And yet somehow, through some combination of medical communication failures, priorities misaligned with patient education, and a healthcare system that focuses more on treating crises than preventing them, this critical information never made its way into the mainstream public conversation about heart health and stroke prevention. There was no major public health campaign. There was no television program dedicated to explaining what happens to your blood pressure while you sleep. There were no widespread education initiatives making sure that every adult over 50 understood the specific physiological vulnerabilities that exist during the nighttime hours. There were just studies accumulating in medical journals while people went home every night and continued the exact same habits that the research was quietly documenting as dangerous. That gap between what cardiovascular science knows and what the general public understands is not a minor oversight or an acceptable delay. It is a serious, sustained failure, and its consequences are not measured in percentages or data points. They are measured in people who did not wake up and in families who never had the chance to know that the risk was preventable. Why does all of this matter with such particular urgency for adults who are 50 years old and older? Because after that threshold, the cardiovascular system undergoes changes that are real, well-documented, and significant in terms of how they interact with the risks we are discussing. The arteries become less elastic and less capable of absorbing the pressure fluctuations that occur naturally throughout the day and night. Blood pressure regulation becomes less precise, with more dramatic swings between highs and lows in response to relatively minor physiological triggers. The body's ability to respond quickly and effectively to internal cardiovascular stress slows measurably. The margin for error that existed in your 30s and 40s, that buffer zone where your body could absorb imperfect habits and recover without incident, grows noticeably smaller with each passing decade. Habits that felt completely fine for 20 or 30 years can cross a threshold at 50 or 60 and begin producing consequences that were not there before. This is not speculation. It is the physiology of aging applied to the specific vulnerabilities of the cardiovascular system during sleep. So let's ask the questions that should have been central to public health education for adults in this age group a very long time ago. Why do heart attacks and strokes happen so disproportionately often during the nighttime hours? Not during exercise, not during moments of intense emotional stress at work, not during the most demanding physical activities of the day, but during the very hours when the body is supposed to be recovering and repairing itself? Why do some people wake up from sleep and others do not, even when their overall health profile and cardiovascular risk factors looked broadly similar the night before? Who bears responsibility for ensuring that adults over 50 have access to clear, actionable information about what is actually happening inside their bodies during the hours they are asleep? And how many people, right now, tonight, in homes across this country and around the world, are going to close their eyes following a routine that is silently and incrementally setting the stage for a catastrophic cardiovascular event that nobody around them will see coming? These are not rhetorical questions. They have answers grounded in real physiology and supported by decades of careful research. Understanding those answers is not complicated once the information is laid out clearly. During sleep, the healthy cardiovascular system is designed to enter what cardiologists and sleep researchers call the dipping phase, a period of natural beneficial reduction in blood pressure and heart rate that allows the cardiovascular system to genuinely rest, recover, and repair the microscopic damage accumulated during the active hours of the day. This nightly dip is not incidental. It is protective. It reduces mechanical stress on arterial walls. It lowers systemic inflammation. It allows the heart muscle itself to recover and perform optimally the following day. Research consistently shows that people who experience healthy nocturnal dipping have significantly better cardiovascular outcomes over time compared to people whose blood pressure does not drop normally during sleep. But this protective process, this natural, built-in cardiovascular rest period, can be interrupted, undermined, prevented, or reversed entirely by habits that feel completely ordinary and harmless on the surface. When the dipping process fails night after night, the cardiovascular system does not get the recovery time it needs. Arterial walls accumulate stress without adequate repair. Inflammation remains chronically elevated. The heart works through the night at a level of effort it was designed to reduce during those hours. And when this pattern continues over weeks, months, and years, as it does for a very large number of adults over 50 who have no idea it is happening, the cumulative damage eventually reaches a point where a single additional stressor becomes the final trigger for a heart attack or stroke that feels sudden and inexplicable to everyone around the person, but that actually represents the endpoint of a very long, entirely preventable process. The first and most consistently underestimated contributor to nighttime cardiovascular strain is late and heavy eating. Many adults over 50 eat their largest meal of the day in the evening. Dinner is often a social occasion, a time to connect with family, a moment of pleasure and relaxation after the demands of the day. This is completely natural and understandable. There is nothing inherently wrong with enjoying an evening meal. But what happens inside the body when that meal is large, rich, and consumed close to the time you plan to sleep is directly and measurably counterproductive to what your cardiovascular system needs during the night. After a large meal, your digestive system demands a significant increase in blood flow to the stomach and intestines to manage the process of digestion. Your heart must respond by pumping harder and faster to redirect blood toward the digestive organs. Blood pressure rises. Metabolism accelerates. The entire physiological trajectory of your body at that moment is moving in exactly the opposite direction from the trajectory that healthy sleep requires. A major study published in the European Heart Journal followed over 100,000 adults across multiple countries for several years, tracking their eating patterns alongside their rates of cardiovascular events. The findings were stark and consistent. People who regularly ate dinner late in the evening showed a significantly elevated risk of nighttime heart attacks and strokes compared to people who finished eating earlier. The biological explanation for this finding involves several overlapping mechanisms. Late digestion raises triglyceride levels in the bloodstream. It increases arterial inflammation through the release of specific inflammatory markers associated with digestive activity. It disrupts the normal, healthy drop in nighttime blood pressure by keeping metabolic activity elevated past the point when it should be declining. And there is a secondary effect that most people never associate with heart health at all. A heavy meal consumed close to bedtime dramatically increases the likelihood of acid reflux. And acid reflux is not simply an uncomfortable digestive condition. In older adults, acid reflux can stimulate the vagus nerve in ways that provoke dangerous disturbances in heart rhythm, particularly in people whose cardiovascular system is already under additional strain from other factors. The second factor involves something that many adults over 50 are already aware of in a general sense but dramatically underestimate in terms of its specific impact during the nighttime hours: medication timing and consistency. For people who take medications to manage blood pressure, cholesterol, blood thinning, or heart rhythm, the question of when those medications are taken and how consistently they are taken is not a logistical detail. It is a matter of cardiovascular survival. Blood pressure in healthy individuals follows a predictable daily rhythm, rising during the active hours and falling during sleep. In many adults over 50, this rhythm is significantly distorted. Blood pressure does not drop during sleep as it should, or it rises sharply in the hours between 2 and 6 in the morning in a pattern that researchers identify as nocturnal hypertension. Large studies published in The Lancet and other leading medical journals have demonstrated that properly timed blood pressure medication can reduce the risk of nighttime cardiovascular events by nearly half in patients with nocturnal hypertension. But when doses are skipped, when medication is taken at inconsistent times, or when treatment regimens are not carefully matched to the individual's blood pressure pattern, the protection disappears precisely when the body is most vulnerable. During those unprotected hours, silent blood pressure spikes can rupture the fatty plaques that accumulate on arterial walls over decades of living, and the clots that form from those ruptures travel to the heart or brain without producing any warning symptoms that the sleeping person could possibly detect. Sleep apnea is the third factor, and it represents perhaps the single most underdiagnosed serious health condition among adults in this age group in the entire developed world. Sleep apnea causes repeated pauses in breathing during sleep, pauses that can last 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or even 30 seconds at a time, occurring sometimes hundreds of times across a single night. Each pause drops blood oxygen levels measurably. Each drop in oxygen triggers an emergency physiological cascade. The heart rate surges, blood pressure spikes sharply, stress hormones flood the bloodstream, and the body's fight-or-flight response activates with full intensity, all while the person experiencing it remains asleep and completely unaware. This can happen 50 times per hour in severe cases. Large-scale studies across multiple research institutions have found that untreated sleep apnea triples the risk of nighttime heart attacks and quadruples the risk of strokes. These are not modest statistical increases that might show up in the margins of a carefully constructed analysis. These are dramatic, enormous, preventable elevations in cardiovascular risk that affect a massive number of people who have never been evaluated, never been diagnosed, and have no idea that what they experience as ordinary snoring or ordinary tiredness is actually a nightly cardiovascular emergency unfolding in slow motion. Dehydration before bed is the fourth factor, and it is the one that tends to produce the most genuine surprise when people encounter the evidence, because the habit that creates it is one that sounds medically reasonable. After the age of 50, the body's sensation of thirst diminishes substantially. The physiological signals that prompt younger people to drink water become weaker and less reliable with age. Many older adults also make a deliberate and conscious decision to limit fluid intake in the evening specifically to avoid the disruption of waking up during the night to use the bathroom. This sounds sensible. It sounds like the kind of thoughtful, proactive adjustment that a health-conscious adult would make. But the cardiovascular consequence of going to bed even moderately dehydrated creates a circulatory situation that significantly amplifies the risk of dangerous clot formation during the night. When the body's fluid levels are low, the blood becomes thicker, more viscous, and slower moving through the vessels. That slower moving, thicker blood is dramatically more prone to forming clots, particularly in the lower velocity flow conditions that occur naturally when the heart rate drops during sleep. Research published in cardiovascular medicine literature found that even moderate dehydration raised the risk of nighttime cardiovascular events by over 60% in the population studied. The prevention is straightforward. Drink a moderate amount of water 1 to 2 hours before going to bed, use the bathroom immediately before lying down, and keep water accessible at your bedside through the night. The fifth factor is bedroom temperature, and it is the one that generates the most skepticism when first mentioned, because it seems almost absurdly minor compared to the seriousness of the health outcomes being discussed. But the cardiovascular data on temperature during sleep is real, consistent, and striking. When a bedroom is too warm, above roughly 75 degrees Fahrenheit, the body works continuously through the night to release excess heat. Blood vessels dilate, heart rate elevates, fluids are lost steadily through perspiration. These are all forms of cardiovascular work that accumulate over the hours of sleep and prevent the heart from getting the genuine rest the dipping phase is designed to provide. When a bedroom is too cold, the opposite mechanism creates an equally serious problem. Blood vessels constrict, vascular resistance increases throughout the circulatory system, and the heart is forced to pump against significantly higher pressure than it would face at an optimal temperature. In older adults whose arterial walls are already less flexible and whose cardiovascular reserve is reduced compared to younger decades, this temperature-driven pressure increase can serve as the final physiological trigger for a heart attack or stroke in an individual who was already at the edge of what their system could handle. What is most essential to understand about all 5 of these factors, late eating, medication inconsistency, untreated sleep apnea, dehydration, and poor temperature control, is that none of them feels dangerous when you are experiencing it. None of them produces obvious warning signs in the moment. A heavy dinner at 9 in the evening feels like a pleasurable end to a long day. A skipped blood pressure pill feels like a minor inconvenience that you will correct tomorrow. Loud snoring feels like an annoying habit rather than a nightly medical crisis. Going to bed a little thirsty to avoid a midnight bathroom trip feels like practical self-management. Sleeping in a warm, cozy room feels like comfort and luxury. These experiences feel normal, they feel fine, and that is precisely the mechanism by which they cause damage. Quietly, invisibly, cumulatively, over months and years, in a body that is silently accumulating the strain without producing any alarm that the waking person could interpret as a warning. The profoundly hopeful side of all of this is that every single one of these factors is addressable. None of them requires expensive medical procedures or radical restructuring of your life. Eating a lighter dinner and finishing it earlier in the evening costs nothing and can begin tonight. Discussing medication timing with your physician is a single conversation that could meaningfully reduce your nighttime cardiovascular risk. Getting evaluated for sleep apnea involves a single appointment and, if diagnosed, a treatment approach that patients consistently describe as life-changing. Drinking a glass of water before bed and adjusting a thermostat are habits so simple that they require almost no effort to implement. The research on circadian cardiovascular physiology consistently shows that addressing these specific factors produces meaningful reductions in nighttime cardiovascular risk. Not after years of sustained effort, but beginning almost immediately as the body is given the conditions it needs to do what it was physiologically designed to do during the hours of sleep. One important note before continuing. Any changes to medication routines should always be made in direct consultation with your physician. Every person's cardiovascular situation is individual, shaped by genetics, medical history, existing conditions, and the specific medications being taken. What represents optimal timing for one patient may need to be adjusted for another. It is also worth noting that the landscape of health information available online contains a significant amount of content that exaggerates risk in ways designed to provoke fear, promotes unproven treatments, or attributes medical authority to individuals or institutions that did not make the claims being cited. Evaluating any health information, including what is presented here, through the lens of your own physician's knowledge of your specific situation, is always the right approach. The goal of this discussion is to raise awareness of real, well-documented physiological risks not to create unnecessary anxiety or to suggest that any single habit will determine whether someone lives or dies. What sleep is supposed to be and what it can be when approached with the understanding of what your cardiovascular system actually needs during those hours is something genuinely worth protecting. The heart has been working without interruption since before you were born. It has sustained you through every demanding season of your life, through every physical and emotional challenge, through every decade of change and adaptation. The nighttime hours are not a passive experience for that organ. They are the window in which it recovers, repairs, and prepares to do it all again. Giving it the conditions it needs to genuinely rest is not a complicated undertaking. It is, in fact, the most fundamental and straightforward form of care you can offer a system that has never once stopped working on your behalf. Thank you sincerely for engaging with this information. The conversation about cardiovascular health during the nighttime hours is one that has many more dimensions worth exploring. The relationship between specific nutritional factors and arterial health, the latest research on how the brain's overnight waste-clearing processes interact with cardiovascular function, and what emerging science is beginning to reveal about the nighttime hours as a window of both vulnerability and extraordinary healing potential. That exploration continues, and your awareness and attention to these questions matter more than you might realize.